everyone, Alexa Dunn here, and today I am going to be talking about 11 things that I love in books. Some of these are tropes, some of these are like concepts and setups, but they're things that I am just a sucker for, that are almost always going to make me reach for a book, and as long as it is done reasonably well, I will probably like it. The first thing I just adore in books is a little dark, but regardless, it's one of my favorite things, and that is sociopaths or kind of twists with characters that relate to abnormal psychology. Anything kind of with a personality disorder that has complex psychology with a character. I'm a sucker for it, and this is really commonly seen in thrillers. One really great example of this, there are many, but a super famous one is Gone Girl. Gillian Flynn really nails it in that book, and actually my favorite Gillian Flynn book is Sharp Objects, which does something similar but different. She's really just a master at kind of that approach to, it's the characters, but they are intrinsically mixed in with the story and the plot. The second thing I love in books is rich assholes. The rich asshole trope. So kind of that peek behind the walls of privilege, and there are lots of variations on this. So it could be at a boarding school, it could be like the coastal town with like the townies versus the rich kids in the manor on the cliff. Anything with those sorts of dynamics, I love. There's just so much fun you can have with like a peek at privilege and like fancy parties and lasers and all of that kind of stuff. Some recent examples that I really enjoyed are Happily and Madly by Alexis Bass, One Night Gone, and The 1000th Floor had this as well. Rich kids doing rich things, having fun, throwing parties. I love it. The third thing I just love in books and I cannot get enough of, royal court intrigue, court politics, royalty, all of that jazz. Though it's not just the royalty. I need all of the intrigue and the politics that go with royalty. And maybe this ties into the rich kids thing as well in its own way. This is like the speculative version of that in many cases. But I'm fascinated by royalty, royal families, royal history, and a lot of the tension and conflict that comes from, well, a lot of the pomp and circumstance of that world, and I'm a sucker for it. I just love it. The fourth thing that I just love in books is, it's kind of a mixed thing. It's like the stolen identity, mistaken identity spy thing. Generally, I like spies in fiction, but there's something about that like tug of conflict from someone pretending to be someone else, especially for reasons, and like they're trying to hide and protect themselves and blend in. Bonus points if it's in a royal court or among rich people. And they're sociopaths. You can mix all of my favorite things together. I mean, isn't that how we get some of our best book ideas? But I just love stories that have those tropes. And some good recent examples are The Cruel Prince, which definitely kind of revolves around this, the intrigue aspect, as well as The Death of Mrs. Westaway by Ruth Ware. I liked how in that book, you know going in, you're with the POV character, and you know she's pretending to be something that she's not. And so much of the tension comes from, is she going to be found out? What are the consequences when that happens? Inevitably, these characters get close to people and feel guilty. I just love all of that stuff. Alright, the fifth thing is a straight up trope, but I love it in books. That is fake dating / marriage / we have to be together romantically for reasons. And then there's tension and conflict and romance forms. It's just one of my favorite foundational plots for a good romance. Then you can stick it into a bunch of different genres. I'm just a huge sucker for it. Okay, the sixth thing I just really like in fiction, period, is Gothic shit. I love Gothic shit. You got creepy old houses, ruminations on nature, like little supernatural things. It's usually not straight supernatural, it's like the hint of it. You'll have things like psychics or tarot or like, ooh, maybe it's ghosts, like all of that stuff. There's usually twisted family secrets involved in Gothics. I love all of it. Give it to me, which is why I have loved Ruth Ware's most recent kind of burst of books, The Death of Mrs. Westaway, which I already mentioned, and The Turn of the Key. I love a little gothic spin on a suspense or a thriller novel, romance as well. Love, love, love Rebecca. That's a great book. If you have not read it, you should read it. Though I barely call it a romance, it's really just a straight up Gothic, but it's one of my favorite books of all time. And very often ties into number 7. I mean, honestly, so many of these things I love in books are often seen together, and that is the isolation stuck somewhere trope slash concept. You'll see this so often in Gothic because of all of those nice Gothic manners, the isolated manners where creepy shit happens. Well, isolated plus creepy shit happens is my jam. And specifically with isolated locations, this could be like And Then There Were None, where they're stranded on an island. I read a book recently, The Guest List by Lucy Foley, where they're stranded on an island and it's a wedding, which is like 2 high concepts mashed together that I really like. There's also An Unwanted Guest by Shari LaPena that I read last year solely because it had this trope setup, that it was a bunch of strangers isolated at an inn in the middle of the mountains during a snowstorm. That is my jam. It automatically ups the tension because you can't go anywhere, and especially when it comes to like murder. I mean, this is really a thriller trope. You know that someone there did it, or there's someone present and you don't know who they are, and it's the they could be lurking around any corner thing, and I just love it. The 8th thing I really love in books, as long as it's done well. This one is actually kind of a 50-50 because when it's done poorly, I loathe it, but it's generally a thing I like, and it almost plays on that kind of stolen identity, pretending to be someone you're not thing, except in that trope, the reader's in on it. But the other thing I really, really like is when there's kind of a twisty POV identity situation that happens in the book, where it's like a trick that the author has played on the reader, and when it's done well, I adore it. So this is essentially when you're reading, it's thriller, suspense is usually where this is used, and it's often multi-POV, and you know that something hinky is going on, but part of the fun of reading it is you trying to figure it out and get ahead of the narrative as you're reading. So you're reading different POVs and you're like detecting, you're doing your investigation of, is this what it seems? Could this be that? And then there's the big twist midpoint or later in the book, and when it's done super, super well, I just really, really like it. Some recent examples that play on this trope that I've read, His and Hers by Alice Feeney plays on this. Her First Mistake, which I read last year, did this. The Rumor did this. And a famous one that I've already mentioned, Gone Girl does this with aplomb. So the 9th thing that I really love in books, again, is one of those double-edged sword ones where it has to be done well, but that is meta in books. I mean like book within a book, that kind of stuff. So like you're reading a book about a writer usually, but you're also reading the book that they're writing. I like that kind of thing when it's done well. So a recent example where it definitely worked for me was The Elizas by Sarah Shepard. It's not something that always works, but when it does, I really, really enjoy it. So the 10th thing that I really love in books is super niche hobbies and interests where the writer goes that extra mile to really immerse yourself in something super specific, sometimes super weird, and like it gives the character and the plot just kind of a super specific flavor that you weren't necessarily expecting or you would never have thought of yourself. Some recent examples of this, I really loved The Lovely and the Lost by Jennifer Lynn Barnes, and that kind of slice of life, super specific hobby. The main character trained search and rescue dogs with her family and went on search and rescue missions, and it was so specific, and I can tell that the author did a lot of research, and I felt like I was a part of that world, and I was really interested in the thing as I was reading, and I cared about it. Another really good example is The Escape Room by Megan Golden, which was one of my favorite books of 2019, and that kind of super specific slice of life was Wall Street, high stakes finances on Wall Street. It's a really fascinating world, and the author did a great job through character choices and POVs and whatnot to build this very intricate, detailed, specific world of the thriller in this case that just made it better. That said, I do have an exception for this one that I will be covering in a video on things I don't like in books. So that is to say, there are some super specific hobbies, interests, worlds that just don't interest me at all. So it does have to be something that I can get engaged with and care about. That's a teaser for the other video for you. See if you can guess the thing that I just really don't like. And last but certainly not least, but pretty niche, the 11th thing I really adore in a good book, though again, it has to be done well, is epigraphs. This is where every single chapter starts with a little snippet of text, speeches, those sorts of kind of like in-world media. This is fictional. It's not real-world quotes or excerpts from literature, but it's things that the author creates within the world, but it's used to make the world feel big and real and specific, and those epigraphs are cleverly chosen to augment your experience of reading and discovering the story, the character, etc. Two books that do this really, really well. Not many books do it, but when they do, I adore it. My all-time favorite is the Thursday Next series by Jasper Fforde. The beginning of every chapter, it'll have these absurd quotations from politicians in that world, and it's absurdist fiction, or from laws, regulations, from interviews, from textbooks, from fiction, etc. And it just really makes you feel like this is a whole real world. And another one that did it more recently was Wicked Saints by Emily Duncan, which really, really helped to flesh out the religion/magic system in that book, and I really, really enjoyed it. I actually did write a book that used this, but it's one of my shelved projects, and someday I shall do it again, because coming up with them was so much fun, and I really love seeing that in books. So that's it, 11 things I really love in books. Let me know down below in the comments, what are some things that you absolutely love in books? Like, what makes it an auto read or an auto buy for you, and just generally is gonna mean that you're probably gonna love a book. Give this video a thumbs up if you like it. I'll make more kind of bookish related content. As I hinted, you are going to get a whole video on things I don't like in books. That's gonna get interesting. And if you're not already subscribed to the channel, go ahead and do that. I post new videos 2 to 3 times a week. As always, guys, thank you so much for watching, and happy reading.